Now, I remembered the joke that I was going to tell you in the running around of the microphone, so we'll do it. This is also my only joke I do every time I'm taking a picture of people. You know, you need the joke to get people to smile. Knock, knock.
Who's that?
Europe.
Europe.
Ooh, no, I'm not. All right, okay. You only need one joke in this life, and that is my one joke. And I say that as someone who has had extensive training in comedy. Like literally, I've taken a whole heap of classes in it, and that's the only joke I've got, so this doesn't sell comedy classes very well. I mentioned evaluative judgment earlier. People might be familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, that people who are not very competent, let's say they are president of a large Western democracy, they're not very competent, but they can think they're amazingly competent. Whereas people who are somewhat more in the middle think they're somewhat in the middle, and people who are really amazing can think they're actually not that great. The Dunning-Kruger studies were also done on comedy. So they got like professional comedians to come in, they got regular people. The regular people often thought they were really, really funny. The professional comedians were more like, nah. Anyway, I say this to say, I know enough about comedy to know that I've probably only got one funny joke. All right, you didn't come here for the Phil comedy show. You came back from lunch to talk generative artificial intelligence. Now, the previous talk was one that I developed very much in a workshop-y type mode for a lot of talking. This one's more in a keynote-y sort of mode, but I've really liked our sort of workshop-y type discussions. So we're going to deviate a little bit from the slides here and there to have just more chats. So that's what's happening if the slides don't totally track to what Phil is saying. I want to start off with quick lightning chat with the person next to you. How do you feel about generative artificial intelligence? Feelings are not thoughts, feelings are feelings. So I want 1 minute with the person next to you, feelings about generative artificial intelligence and assessment. Gosh, people usually have a slump after lunch, but you're like going. This is wonderful. All right, let's go through some feelings. I'm forgetting my list of feelings. I used to be a telephone counsellor, and one of the secrets is on the wall next to me was this wheel with so many different feeling names. So I wouldn't just always say, sounds like you're feeling happy, sounds like you're feeling sad. I had like specificity to the feelings I was talking about. So I'm trying to draw that up. Fear. Hand up if there was some sort of fear in there. Okay, all right. Anger. Great. We got anger. Sort of a beige flag, sort of a meh sort of feeling. Okay. Excited. All right. Some category of feelings that we haven't mentioned.
Apprehension.
Apprehension. Great. We can just shout these ones out. Curiosity, out of depth. Great. Terror. Yeah. What else?
Worried about my kids and their future.
Worried about our kids. Yeah, I am worried about my kids and their future with this as well. What is the future of like meaningful work for my kids? How are my kids going to encounter some pretty horrible stuff on these platforms? I'm a dad of 2 boys. I know that the data that's used to train these models, a lot of it has things that I do not want my boys learning. Whole bunch of horrible, horrendous things. Any other feelings? Helplessness, yes. It is happening to us rather than something we wanted to go through.
It feels fast.
Fast, yes.
It feels incredibly fast.
Incredibly fast. This is so true. It felt like the pandemic felt really fast, but then reflecting on that, kind of things changed and then they stayed the same for quite a while, and then they slowly seemed to be changing in some ways back, but also not. But this seems to be changing on a day-by-day basis. Okay, so we've got a lot of different feelings with respect to this. My talk is don't fear the robot. I'm going, like, I had no more contemporary lines. I thought I would call it like not okay computer, or It's not a techno-utopia, not techno-nirvana, nah. But I don't have any more contemporary music references, so I'm sorry. But I'm going from the don't fear, let's see how we can work with this and incorporate sort of angle. But I do also recognise, especially that feeling of it being so fast, the feelings matter here. This is hard. We've just had to do radical changes as a result of the pandemic to assessment, and now we've got to do changes all over again. This is really, really hard stuff. So I acknowledge if you are feeling feelings, it's okay. I plug my book there as well. Your library possibly has a copy of it. Go and get your library copy. The publisher gives us academics like nothing. I got a royalty check for $0 the other day from a different publisher. I'm like, what? Why did you even? It's insulting that you would just send me this. Just don't send me something rather than a $0. Anyway, check your library for a copy if you like any of the stuff that I say. Now, I like to start with a bit of a disclaimer when I do these talks. Firstly, I am a standards-based assessment person. This is not particularly controversial here in the UK, but in Canada, the very notion of standards-based assessment, of things like constructive alignment, of the idea that we might do something like set out the outcomes we wish students to achieve, that sort of thing was pretty contentious. So we had whole big discussions about that. The UK context, by comparison, seems not to have that. I actually think it's partly because in Northern America, they don't have national higher education regulators, and they don't have regulators with any teeth at all. So institutions kind of do whatever the hell they want. And when called out on it by the public, they go, well, we're the university, we know what we're doing, trust us. Whereas Australia and the UK, for better or for worse, have strong regulators who threaten to do stuff to us, and we would lose our funding or whatever. Has its pros and cons. One of the pros is we can have a conversation today where we know about standards and outcomes and that sort of thing, and we're working within that framework. You may view it as neoliberal hell, and that's a read on it. That's where we're coming from. But I think ultimately getting this generative AI thing and assessment more broadly right matters because evidencing learning matters. We need to be able to say what students are capable of. I'll give you a few examples of why this matters. In Florida, they recently had a massive cheating scandal in their elevator maintenance courses. That's terrifying. Like, I don't know if you're okay in elevators, or if you're one of the people who every time you get in, you're like, oh, where's the emergency button? How do I get out of here? I had a friend trapped in an elevator recently. He didn't make it to our Dungeons and Dragons game, so it matters. But it matters. This isn't just some sort of broadly academic thing. People might have seen the Ernst & Young cheating scandal recently. I believe they got fined $100 million American dollars for people cheating in ethics exams. Which is to say that it's something that exists out there in, the fancy companies that I know at least we in Australia use to come and give us audits on whether we're doing the right thing. They have this problem as well. And people might be familiar with the Christchurch earthquake. One of the big buildings that collapsed there was built by someone who had fraudulently obtained his engineering degree from an Australian university. This is something that is sometimes a matter of life and death. Us being able to say what people are capable of really matters. Now, I'm not framing any of this generative AI stuff today as cheating. I think we've probably moved on in the conversation from that. I'm framing it as assessment, and assessment really matters. It matters that we get it right. Broader questions about generative AI, they matter as well. So if you are here thinking generative AI is exploitative, it rips off other people's intellectual property, Or if you're here saying the reason why students won't do their work is because of neoliberalism or large class sizes or students as consumers or credentialism or some macro social thing, then I agree with you, but it's not where we're going to focus our conversation, because those aren't kind of levers that I can pull and change. I am operating within the neoliberal hell, like I can't change it. And I don't have an easy fix. I don't think there are easy fixes here. I'm interested in long-term approaches rather than short-term hacks. So I don't know if you experienced this, but like at the start of the generative AI thing, people were like, yeah, well, what if you set it tasks that are outside of the era that it knows about? So like, it only knows up to 2022, so I'm going to assess 2023 and onwards. That's the fix. And then what happened? It learned about those things, and it took all of like a month for it to learn about that stuff. So any short-term solutions that are based on current deficiencies in these generative AI tools, large language models, are not where we're going to live today for the talk, because they're just not going to last. We're looking for longer-term things. And finally, because this is cheating related, and I want to get it all out there, my mum helped me contract cheat in Year 4. We had to do a poster, and I was terrible with this poster on the similarities and differences between Canada and Australia. That joke went down really well when I was in Canada last week, and here it doesn't matter as much, but there it was like so right on. Mum just did most of it for me, and I now understand that that was possibly what we'd call contract cheating, the outsourcing of work. But also it was kind of understood that parents do provide help on their children's work. In Australia, we almost had legislation that would have made it a crime for a parent to offer to do their child's reference list in a higher education task. And the crime would have been punishable by up to 2 years imprisonment. Anyway, I organised a petition and had like a national radio debate with the chief exec of our higher education regulator saying, this is crazy. They said, no, it's not the intent of the law. I said, but it's a literal read of the law, it would do that. And we got it changed. But if you'd like sort of more of a hard-hitting documentary on the problem of parents doing their children's work, there's an episode of Peppa Pig. The episode is titled School Project, if you want to look it up on YouTube. And Madame Gazelle sets the students the task of a diorama. And of course, they all go home and get their parents to make the diorama. And then they all come in and they do the diorama and they do that ha-ha falling down on the ground laughing thing they do in Peppa Pig at the end. And I raise that just to say that our understandings of cheating, integrity and assessment are all socially constructed and exist differently at different times and places. All right. Enough disclaimer, on we go. There's 3 things from this presentation. Firstly, that generative AI can do a lot of what we currently assess. Secondly, that we probably can't and shouldn't ban it. And thirdly, that assessment needs to prepare students for their future and not our past. So those are our sort of 3 big things from this presentation. Seeing 2 of my presentations on the one day, you see they all take the same structure, so the structure doesn't seem so impressive anymore. But anyway, that's it. So Gen AI can do stuff. Here is the US medical licensing exam. It's a paper about that. By performing at a greater than 60% threshold on the NBME-free Step 1 dataset, we show that the model achieves the equivalent of a passing score for a third-year medical student. Now, this is ChatGPT on the US medical licensing exam. Not a totally sort of authentic scenario because that licensing exam is meant to be taken in a supervised context. And if you've got access to ChatGPT in that, then something has gone wrong. But it does tell us the sort of standard that it can perform at. Here's another one that I really like. This is from a whole bunch of Australian engineering educators. And it's looking at ChatGPT and how well it can do in engineering education. They went to, I think it was 10 different engineering modules, got all the assessed tasks over all those modules, and tried to see if ChatGPT can do the different tasks. And for some of them, they had to sort of adapt a picture into some text, although more modern versions of these generative AI tools could just work straight with the picture. So there was a little bit of translation work required. And they went through like every single task. And if you go to the paper, they've got every single task attempted by ChatGPT, what modifications they had to do to get ChatGPT to pass, and a little bit of commentary. I raised this paper partly because it's a good example, and if you're in engineering, it's great. They've, to some extent, done this work for you. But also that we in our disciplines need to start adopting this as part of our practice. Just for my assessed tasks, how well do various generative AI tools do them? They found pretty well for a lot of the tasks, pretty poorly for some of the tasks. And even comedy, I mentioned that before. So I said, ChatGPT, write me something in the style of Jerry Seinfeld about ChatGPT and sort of assessment and cheating and that. I'm not very good at impersonating a Jerry Seinfeld, so, yeah. But, you know, I was thinking about this ChatGPT thing, and it's fascinating how it handles student assignments. I mean, it's like they programmed it with the wrong priorities. You'd think they'd focus on making it an expert in academic writing, but no. Instead, it's more interested in being the master of copying and pasting. It's like they taught it Control-C and Control-V before anything else. So now, when you ask ChatGPT to help you with your assignment, you end up with a mishmash of stolen ideas that would make a plagiarist blush. I like that bit. That's decent. A lot of this ChatGPT outputs is kind of garbage, but then you spot something and you're like, yeah, that's good. It's a control-fail situation, folks. We're just one upgrade away from a virtual academic genius. Until then, I guess we'll have to settle for ChatGPT, the control-copy comedian. It's okay. The quality of that knock-knock joke that I did at the start, though, was better than that, right? Maybe? All right. I got like a literal nod, like an actual, yes, Phil, yes, that was better. I'm going to hold that with me. But the mishmash of stolen ideas that would make a plagiarist blush, that's a decent phrase. Something I really want to stress is that this is the worst it's going to be. It's going to get better. We are at this stage in the 2001 A Space Odyssey that is the generative AI revolution, though I think I can confidently say the generative AI revolution is going to be more interesting than 2001 A Space Odyssey, and definitely more fast-paced. So my parents made us watch 2001 A Space Odyssey every Christmas Eve. What a weird thing to do. What a weird thing. If you just want to get all of 2001 A Space Odyssey turned into GIFs, it's down the bottom there. But I raise this to say, we're at that point in the movie. We are at the real early stages. It's getting better. We know it's moving really fast. Any moves we make that are based on deficiencies in ChatGPT, for instance, are not long-lasting moves. Because ultimately, there's the goal of developing a high-level machine intelligence. Anyone know, that's me, by the way, on the left. I used this picture without saying that was me, and I look different without hair. Anyone know who I'm giving a... It is, very good, thank you. It is in Manchester. This is great. I go there for the Assessment in Higher Education conference quite often, and I encourage you to go to that conference as well. It is next week. So possibly too late for you to go to. But anyway, great conference, you should go to it. I was there for Assessment in Higher Ed, giving my mate Alan Turing a kind of an awkward distance hug. I'm not sure why I'm awkward there doing a photo hug, but in the field of AI, we often talk about these Turing tests and these ultimate goals. One of these big goals of AI is a high-level machine intelligence, which is AI that's capable of what a person in a given professional domain is capable of. So an AI that could be an accountant, or could be an architect, or could be a historian. These authors surveyed a bunch of AI researchers and found that 170 of them said there was a 90% likelihood of achieving this high-level machine intelligence by the year 2075. That was like the median. Now, that was done in 2016 or probably slightly before. I wonder if they were to do this now, whether people would say the same thing. I suspect the researchers might say it's going to happen sooner. But they still thought there was a 90% likelihood of it happening, we can't build assessment that is around it not being able to do the stuff that we assess, because it's coming for it all. And there's also this other parallel thing called the robot college student test, which is one of these Turing tests whereby AI researchers are explicitly trying to build artificial intelligence that can by itself get a university degree. That is a goal. That is a thing they're working towards. So that's that we probably can't and shouldn't ban it. Sorry, that's the Gen AI can do a lot of what we currently assess. I was like, how are we 2/3 the way through this? And on my watch, it says we're not 2/3 the way through the time. This is bad, Phil. You're going to have to come up with more filler. Okay, that's the first one. The second one, that we probably can't and shouldn't ban it. I'd love you to have a little bit of a chat about, with the person next to you, about what's the talk been at your institution? Are you on a let's ban it, or let's embrace it, or something else? Where's your institution at? I'll give you 3 minutes on this one. Wonderful. So, who here is at an institution that's on the ban it, deny, don't let students use it sort of end of things, do you think? Okay. See, there's a lot of rhetoric as if there's a lot of institutions that are like that, but I'm yet to find someone who actually works at one of those. So that's kind of interesting. We've had some in Australia that have tried it and they've kind of walked back from it. We had a school system that all the schools in Queensland try and ban it, and they walked away from that. Okay, so everyone else is somewhere that's got some different approach to banning it. Someone want to talk about their institution's sort of thing, or not their institution, but like an institution down the road that they've heard of. If you go and hang out on drug user forums on the internet like I do, despite the hair, I'm as straight-laced as you get. But I love sort of vicariously experiencing it. There's this term, swim, that they use, which is someone who isn't me. And they think that they're so cool, like, someone who isn't me scored a big bag today, and come on, the cops know you're talking about yourself. But anyway, anyone want someone who isn't me, or some institution down the road sort of talk, or their own institution? Phil's preamble was so long I forgot what the question was. We got up the front here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm at UCL up the road. I'm happy to name it. We're kind of on the more progressive stance. I wouldn't say we're quite embracing it, but we're certainly adapting. We're trying to put out guidance to students and to staff. We're trying to improve everybody's AI literacy so they know how to use it ethically and effectively. We're doing quite a bit of work on assessment redesign. We've got a big job ahead of us, and it's partly exciting and partly deeply scary, because I think the institution is expecting us to take a lead here, and we're only a little bit ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. We were kind of expected to have something very thoughtful and evidence-based ready to go right at the start, and I'd say we still kind of don't have that. We're still kind of scrambling a bit. Yeah. Anyone else want to talk to their institution? I guess, no, actually, here's the thing. For all the things that you just said about UCL, would anyone else say that that applies to their institution? All those things that were said? Yeah. Interesting. So there's quite a few, which could just be the UCL people in the room. I would say that the things that you said there apply to my university. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common approach in the sector. Trying to embrace it, trying to provide some leadership, trying to do the assessment redesign work. Yeah.
I mean, I think a big worry is that people maybe aren't actually as aware as we might assume. So obviously everybody in this room is well aware of what the potential is and what the threats might be. But I'm not convinced that all of the teachers in the institution are tuned in yet and realise that they may have to do some real thinking about their assessment.
Yeah. I still have like the first conversation about generative AI with people on a fairly regular basis, and that blows my mind, but I still have that first conversation. And then there's people who are in the conversation, but they haven't tried the tools at all. And that's like another conversation of, well, might be good if you actually try out ChatGPT or Midjourney or something else. Yeah. Does anyone else want to talk about their institution? Yeah, just up the front here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm at King's College London, and I'm on one of the lectures on the online distance learning programs at the IUPPM. And it's a very similar strategy we're following, and we've just received some guidance yesterday on how to handle AI-related essays or submissions. So I think, yes, we're trying to embrace it, and we're trying to encourage students to be honest about using it as well, and declare it if they've used it, and going forward, learn from it how we can work together in using it to support the learning rather than just do the essays.
Yeah, and I think that thing of declare it, just be upfront about what you're doing, is something that I also hear a lot of institutions. My institution does that. This idea that we're not going to be able to stop people from using it, so at least let's declare it, let's be honest and upfront about it. There was initially that sort of thing about, can you have ChatGPT as a co-author on a research paper, which was done early on. There are some, but has been walked away from. My take on that is authors of a research paper need to be able to take intellectual ownership over the work and the integrity of that work, and ChatGPT can't do that. I'm totally fine. Like, I'm not the judge, so what I say doesn't matter, but I'm totally fine if you get ChatGPT to write your journal article, as long as you take intellectual ownership as an author over what it says. If you get it to fake data, that's no different to faking data yourself. That's major research misconduct. In the student space, however, and I say that because I don't really care if you can write a journal article or not. I'm not in some sort of pissing competition over who's a good journal article writer. I care about the quality of the ideas in the work. But from the student perspective, it does matter if they can write, if we value writing. Okay. I'm going to tell you something that it seems like we all kind of agree on, that we probably can't and shouldn't ban it. So when we ban, we set restrictions. An open book exam versus a closed book exam. In a closed book exam, we are setting restrictions. Now, restrictions that don't work are theatre. If I set a closed book exam and you open your book, because no one's really checking if it's a closed book exam, that just makes it a bunch of theatre. It doesn't work, and it makes the task worse. I should have just set an open book exam if I'm not really serious about keeping it closed book. Similar thing with generative AI. If we set a restriction like you must not use ChatGPT in this task, but we can't really enforce that, we're just making it worse for those people who are honest and don't use it. So if we're thinking about maybe restricting the use of it, how can we restrict it? There's really two ways. One of them is restricting access to it. And I can say that in Australia, we've taken that approach with contract cheating sites. We have this legislation that allows the government to block access to contract cheating sites. And we've blocked a whole 200 of them. Now, I don't know if anyone's aware of how many contract cheating sites there are, but gee, there's more than 200. A hell of a lot more. And the 200 list does not include homework help sites like Chegg, which is not a contract cheating site. Chegg is a textbook rental company. No one had the Chegg? No, yeah, Chegg is Chegg was worth $12 billion at the height of the pandemic. It's a homework help site, but a lot of students do use it to cheat. Chegg's not on that list. Anyway, let's say even if Chegg was on that list and the website was blocked at the national level, I'm going to count 3, 2, 1, and then I want you to say how I would get around that block. So I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, and then you say, no, I didn't say it. No one heard that. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Thank you. Now, if we could get there that quickly, the whole let's block generative AI thing, which is discourse that happens in some places, is crazy. Some institutions block contract cheating sites, and, so be it, might have some sort of symbolic value. Blocking generative AI on the institutional level is kind of scary. So it will mean that you as a person that works at the institution who can't install some outside VPN app on your computer, yeah, you're blocked. But students on the Wi-Fi on their own machine, they could easily VPN around it. So it makes it worse. So the whole, let's block it, no. And then there's the detecting angle. So everyone's seen a whole bunch of tools out there. You might be familiar with Turnitin's ChatGPT detector thing. You might have seen various things sitting on like GitHub or Hugging Face or various online things. You might know that sometimes people upload student work to ChatGPT and say, did you write this? And ChatGPT says something like if it thought it wrote it or not. Not that ChatGPT can think. It's unclear how effective these detectors are. There's claims of very high detection rates, but these haven't been verified by independent researchers. So when someone says it's 99% effective, what does that mean? What data set was it tested on? Is that the same data set it was trained on? That's problematic in the AI machine learning field. Does this 99% include both false positives and false negatives and weight them equally? Because to me, like a false positive flag is really, really problematic. I can create a machine that detects 100% of AI written text, and you can too. And I'll tell you how this machine works. Every time it's presented with any text, it says this is AI written text. That machine detects 100% of AI written text. Now, that's a pretty useless and diabolical machine to use because it also says 100% of non-AI written text is AI written text. Until we get some decent evidence that these detector type tools work, we should be very wary of them. There's also claims in the literature that AI detection won't be possible in the long term. Now, that's based on a preprint study, so I don't know. I don't want to really push that angle too much, but there is the argument out there that sort of as generative AI gets better, the detection models won't get better at the same speed, so it won't be possible in the long term. But anyway, if you take one thing from this talk, and this is like permission to sleep for the rest of it, don't upload student work to some random thing on the internet. Now, it's partly because I'm not sure they work very well, but it's also because the terms of service of those tools are unclear. When you just chuck it up on ChatGPT, who knows what OpenAI does with this text that is the student's work, that is not your work, that the student did not give you permission to put up there? Who knows what it does? Who knows what some random GitHub page does? We don't know. We haven't got the student's permission to do that. Now, sometimes people go, yeah, but Phil, what about Turnitin? People upload student work to Turnitin. And yeah, people do upload student work to Turnitin. The difference there is that your university, if you use Turnitin or some other text matching tool, has checked through the terms of service, the legal agreements with Turnitin. Students should be made aware of that their work's going to go there, and it's part of the accepted thing that's happening. People know that's going to happen. It's different with some random GitHub page. I've got a flag here. I've received research funding in the past from Turnitin. It was actually to do a study evaluating the effectiveness of one of their tools at detecting contract cheating, which is just the sort of study I think we need for these sorts of tools. But yeah, anyway, take one thing, don't use random internet pages and upload student work to them. It's crazy I need a whole slide on this, but I don't know if you've seen there was a professor in the States who uploaded student work to ChatGPT and it said, heaps of people in your class have got me to write and it's all cheating, and this professor failed all these students. It's unclear how many of them had used ChatGPT or not. What is clear is that he should not have uploaded that work to it. Okay, I said earlier on that what's easy in the short term probably won't work in the long term. I really like this table here. It's from this LinkedIn post by Jason Lodge, Sarah Howard and Jacqueline Broadbent. They look at broad categories of approaches on the left side: ignore, ban, invigilate, embrace, design around and rethink. And then how well those broad approaches will work in the short term, medium term and long term. The idea of ignoring it, I think that ship has sailed. This isn't a we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We are on the bridge. This is now. Banning it, we just talked about that. It's problematic, and I actually think probably risky or impossible is more of a short-term thing. I don't think we can really ban it. Invigilate, where appropriate. I agree with them on this. We are at a point now where for some outcomes, if we really want to know if students have achieved them, we need to supervise the performance of those outcomes. I think we still probably do too many exams, but I also think there's a lot of times we don't do enough supervised assessment. That can take so many forms. I'm not saying we've got to return to pen and paper exams at all. We want a broad spectrum of invigilated activities. Interactive oral assessment is something we could really look to do more of. I mentioned before how when I taught computer science, we'd sit down with students and talk about their work. And I would say, how does this bit work? Can you explain that? Why did you make this choice? It was very clear to us, and I'm talking in the early 2000s, it was very clear to us when they'd done the work themselves or when they hadn't. Now, I've talked about interactive oral assessment before, and I've had someone say there's huge potential for bias and disadvantage for some students, and I really do agree with that. Not everyone talks well about their work. That same criticism could be labelled at almost all assessment though. All assessment has ways at which it advantages and disadvantages some students. So some interactive oral assessment could be helpful. The other critique when I mentioned interactive oral assessment is it's very labour intensive, which it is. There is no denying that. However, if we look at things at a program level, if we look at that concern that the person can maintain an elevator, be ethical, or not build a building that's going to fall down, if we look at that at a program level, we may identify key moments where it really matters to us that students are capable of things and resource those moments more, and then maybe care less about this whole integrity thing in these other moments. That's a possibility. Embracing it. So this is, yeah, we're just going to go all in on it and believe in it, which seems to be the approach. There's that comment about equity issues, which I agree with. At the moment, setting tasks which require students to sign up on the OpenAI terms and conditions, that's reliant on students being willing to sign up to those. Is that something they want to agree with? Not everyone's okay with that. Designing around it is the, ChatGPT can't do X, Y, Z right now, so I'm going to assess a task in a way that will rely on it not being able to do that. Might have worked at some stage, but it's really risky in the long term. And number 6, rethinking, is probably where we have to go in the long term. So that's thinking about whole sequences of tasks, how we can build new tasks that aren't reliant on ChatGPT being unable to do them, but they might incorporate it and they might embrace it, and working at that program level. Really encourage you to have a look at that LinkedIn post by them. So that's the we probably can't and shouldn't ban it. Now we're going to move on to talking about assessment preparing students for their future, not our past. And I'd love you to talk with the people in your row about what is the likely future for generative AI in your field. So it could be that you're a discipline-based academic. Think about, the field of accounting in practice. What's accounting going to be like in the next 5 years? How is generative AI going to work there? Could be you are a learning technologist. What's generative AI going to look in learning technology? So 5 minutes. What's the future for generative AI and your field? All right. So who wants to tell us about the future of generative AI in their discipline? Yeah, just yes.
Yes, we were talking with my colleague from health faculties, we'll say, on King's campus. Perhaps in terms of, in our disciplines, we've got communication, so communication to patients. And could there be avenue when there is this kind of interactive approach to help set up, but again, it has to be supervised because we got to make sure apparently what it's saying makes some sense and it's not dangerous, but could it help us with communication teaching and getting students prepared for communicating with patients, and where we seem to have students with a bit more challenges coming in currently because of whatever the pandemic has done in terms of interacting with people. So I might be naive, but that's one avenue I thought perhaps.
Yeah, so we may use it for communication. The whole dream of the chatbot was that it was going to be able to communicate with people and, you know, do some of that labour perhaps. Yeah. Anyone else? We've got two down here, yeah.
Hi Phil. I've been working in learning technology for 20 years. And when I first started, I thought, I'm only going to be in this job for 5 years because everyone will understand this technology. They won't need me, they won't need my help, and the job will just disappear. And arguably, well, not arguably, most people would recognise that that is actually not the case. And so a little part of me is hoping that will still be valued and around to help people. But obviously you can sense my tentative nervousness that it may be that we're not, because the technology may be able to do it a little bit better than we do. But I think most people who have been in technology would say it's a people role, so we've still got some value, surely. Surely?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, there's that whole, you know, you won't be replaced by an AI, you'll be replaced by someone using an AI, that sort of thing. I agree, it's probably not going to replace you. It is a fascinating thing how we kind of did think the technology was going to get so easy and sophisticated that people would just be able to use it and all that. But I think the core pedagogical function of someone in a learning technology role is always going to be there. I think, I hope. The sort of the Trojan mouse thing, we go in with the tech, but really we're not about the clicking and clicking, we're about the broader pedagogy stuff. Yeah, and I think there's one more just there.
Thank you. Yes, there's archaeology and economic history / anthropology. So in our case, I think it more looks like a personal research assistant, which can, to whom you mean make automatic some of the tasks, such as drafting reports on the field work, for example, or in my case, for example, in economic history, now Microsoft introduced its own bot implanted into Excel, where you can just give a text task, identifying a pattern or correlation without actually writing down the formula. So it increases your productivity rather than replaces you by taking the least. So the manual tasks, which you would have otherwise performed yourself, and you can focus on the high value output of the research in the midterm. Sorry, in the short term, 5 years we said. Maybe in 5 years, if a robot is paired with AI and can go in place for you to the archive and collect the physical documents, digitalize them, then we are screwed, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting that to what extent is it going to be the drudgery? The drudgery bits that we don't want to do, and to what extent is it going to take the high level stuff? Someone on Twitter wrote a really good tweet that I'm going to garble, but it's sort of that we've ended up in this scenario where people are doing a whole bunch of, people are left over doing a whole bunch of manual work while the AI creates art for us. And it's like, that's not the future we were meant to be sold. Yeah. So I think we've talked through a few different things that are ways in which AI is likely to encroach or support our various disciplines and professions. And that's where I'm going at with this, that assessment needs to prepare students for their future, not our past. But I'm going to take a small diversion here and talk about validity. Now, don't fall asleep. Validity is cool, okay? We're cool. You go home, you talk with your cool friends, you tell them about this validity thing, they're going to think you're so cool. Cool people don't use the word cool so much, Phil. But I want to say don't be scared of validity. When I say validity, let's go with the simplest lay definition. That's just assessing what we mean to assess. We're in an outcomes-based environment. When we assess, we're meant to assess specific learning outcomes. We had a chat earlier today about participation marks and attendance marks. Those are a validity problem because we say we're assessing this, but really we give you marks if you attend class. That's a validity problem there because we're not assessing what we purport to assess. Generative AI is a secondary concern to validity. Validity is primary concern. If some people use generative AI, but our assessment is total garbage and really doesn't assess the outcomes we mean to assess, that's the problem we should address first, not the generative AI thing. If in our efforts to respond to generative AI, we do things that hurt validity, that's a bigger problem than generative AI. So if we change our tasks so much that we're no longer actually assessing the outcome, we've contorted them to try and stop generative AI. That's a big problem. Restrictions that can't be enforced hurt validity. So if we say, and you're not allowed to use generative AI, but then some people do use it, we've designed the assessment as if nobody's using generative AI, but then some people do. That hurts the validity of assessment. Exclusion hurts validity. My research centre has a book out recently called Assessment for Inclusion. It's open access, it's published by Routledge. In that book, I make the argument that anything we do that excludes people hurts validity because assessment that only works to assess the outcomes for some people is less valid than assessment that works for everyone to assess the outcomes. If you can't perform well in an exam because you have trait test anxiety or it's impossible to get to the exam venue that's an hour out of town, that's a validity threat. And cheating hurts validity. If some people cheat, if we have significant degrees of cheating, which, you know, the rate of contract cheating is about 10%, that's a validity problem. We've got to view our response. If we are responding to generative AI because we're worried we won't be able to assess people anymore, that's a validity concern and we need to view it inside of all the other validity concerns. Okay, that was the cool slide on validity. I told you it would be cool. Okay, all right. I'm going to talk authentic assessment, equally cool. Authentic assessment kind of builds on that conversation we were just having of let's try and represent the world outside of the assessment, the world outside the institution. It aims to improve validity because ultimately we want to prepare students for that world. We want them to have developed and achieved those outcomes. It's not an anti-cheating panacea though. Look at Kath Ellis and colleagues' work. They found that authentic assessments, there was heaps of contract cheating happening with authentic assessments because they went and found heaps of contract cheating and said, gee, so much of this is authentic assessment. I love authentic assessment, but it's not an anti-cheating panacea. When I say authentic assessment, I really like this framework by Villarroel et al. They have 3 elements to authentic assessment: realism, cognitive challenge, and evaluative judgment. That's the framework that I'm going to roll with. There's others in the literature. I like this one because it came out of a systematic review on the research on authentic assessment. And we want, when we're talking about authentic assessment, to think about authentic to the future, not just authentic to now, not just authentic to, you know, a few years back, but to actually represent where we think the world is going to be. Because generative AI isn't a, you know, in the future thing, just, it's in the now. Things are developing really rapidly. I have a friend who's a copywriter who doesn't write copy anymore and hasn't written copy for years because he got started using one of the earlier tools called Jasper, got pretty good at it, trained some colleagues. Now he runs a team of people who are copywriters, but they really just use generative AI to pump out content. And this is a lot of the stuff we read on the internet has for a while been produced by these. I can't say it's good content. I don't think he's proud of the stuff he produces, but this is authentic professional practice. What about the near and distant future? We talked about this a bit just then. And putting that into authentic assessment, we end up with future authentic assessment. Assessment that faithfully represents not just the current realities of the discipline in practice, but the likely future realities of that discipline. So a shift from the present to the future with authentic assessment. When we think about the future, remember the three elements: realism, cognitive challenge, and evaluative judgment. When we think about realism, we want to think about tasks. To what extent do these faithfully represent the current and future of the discipline? The physical contexts, the tools, the places, and the social contexts, the people, the types of collaboration. Now, you might think, Phil, you're asking me to predict the future, and we don't know what the future is going to be. There's been a default assumption around generative AI that it's going to get better and better and better forever. And that is the techno-utopia there, but it's not the only potential reality. We could end up in some sort of dystopia. We could end up in the Black Mirror sort of scenario, which feels like probably where we're going to end up, where it is differentially available to different people, where the terms of use require so much out of us, they suck our soul out, and I don't know what else. It's important to not just think this is going to be amazing and free to everyone forever. We will see more restrictions on this. We already see inequity where students who have a paid version of ChatGPT can use it whenever they want and as much as they want. But if you've tried using ChatGPT in one of those peak times, you just can't get on. There's already inequity there. And the third possible scenario is a collapse or catastrophe one. The Australian in front of the audience who'd just flown all the way around the world says we're in the middle of a climate catastrophe. We are. The assumption this stuff is going to be able to be used forever is kind of funny when we're burning through about a fifth of our climate budget every year, our carbon budget to stay under 1.5. That's scary. We could end up in a world where these tools are not available to everyone because they don't exist and we're rubbing sticks together to get warm. So when we think about future authentic assessment, there are many possible realities that we need to be authentic to, which raises to us, do we need to see students do things without generative AI? Sometimes, every time, never. If you're in an aeroplane, as I have been a lot recently, and the related climate catastrophe, but if you're in the aeroplane, you want the pilot who learned to fly the aeroplane when the instruments work and when the instruments fail. But do they need to have been trained only when the instruments fail? No, because they're much more efficient when the instruments are all working, when all the doodads and buttons and all that work. My flight wouldn't have arrived on time without them. So some of the time we need the pilot to be able to fly it when they work and some when they don't work. There's a lot of different ways we can think about how we would choose throughout the course of a whole degree to allow the use of these tools or to disallow them. One particular way that I'll encourage is to think about scaffolding and reverse scaffolding. We're familiar with scaffolding. It's this idea that we allow students more supports at the start when they need them and less supports as time goes on. When my kids are stacking the dishwasher and they're doing a terrible job, my younger child, my 5-year-old, I guide his hand into the dishwasher to put things in. That's a high degree of scaffolding. With my 10-year-old, as he progressed, we moved on to verbal comments about where things go, to then just feedback on the dishwasher stacking, which, we had the feedback conversation earlier. That's a scaffolding type approach. More supports at the start that gradually fade as capability develops. We could do that with generative AI. We could allow students the use of ChatGPT, but then as they've themselves mastered those outcomes, withdraw it. Or we can do a reverse scaffolding approach, only allowing the use of generative AI when the related outcomes have been mastered. So, sort of like you're, in school, how you're not allowed to use the calculator at the start. until you've mastered those times tables. Once you've mastered them, then you can use the calculator, because when you use it, you're going to be better able to spot when a mistake has been made. So think scaffolding, think reverse scaffolding when you're trying to locate generative AI across a degree. Thinking future cognitive challenge, what's going to be left behind for people to do? We had this chat before about does the generative AI just do the drudgery, or does the generative AI do the advanced stuff? Does the generative AI do the art while we do the manual work? In this book, I talk about cognitive offloading, which is one way to think about it. Cognitive offloading is any time we use a tool or a physical action to reduce the mental burden of a task. If you write something down, as people have been doing, you are cognitive offloading. You're writing stuff down so you don't have to remember it later. Socrates is probably the first to complain about cognitive offloading. Socrates talks about people with this advent of this writing thing appearing as if they know something, but really they just wrote it down or they read it, and how this is a big problem. And over many successive technological developments, we've seen similar complaints about cognitive offloading. A key thing to think about with cognitive offloading is what type of cognitive load is being offloaded. Is it intrinsic to the task, like core to it, and we can't separate it from the outcome being assessed? Or is it extraneous cognitive load? That is the busy work, the bullshit, the stuff that's not really essential. Let's allow students to offload that stuff. Finally, future evaluative judgment. I mentioned evaluative judgment earlier in the day. It's this capability to make decisions about the quality of your own work and the work of others. This becomes even more important in a world of generative AI, because it's up to us to own that. As I said, if we write a research paper with ChatGPT, we need to own the work. We need to say, yes, this is mine, I've decided to submit it, I carry the consequences with me. When students use ChatGPT or a large language model or whatever, they need to make a judgment that the work is good enough that has been produced. The challenge is the capability to make that judgment develops as you're able to do the work yourself. I am able to use ChatGPT to write blurbs for my comedy shows because I can write those blurbs myself. I know what a good one looks like. I know one that's going to attract a good crowd or not. I can't use it to do some advanced chemistry work because I have no idea if the outputs are any good, because I can't do that myself. So there is still a need to develop the capability to do the work yourself so you can judge the quality of the work. That's evaluative judgment. And Margaret Bierman and Rose Luckin make the argument that another key evaluative judgment capability that stays human is constituting standards, deciding what makes for good enough. That's something we need to do. We can't let the machines decide what's good enough for us. I said authentic assessment's no panacea. If you want something about sort of, assessment should motivate students, have a look at this chapter. It was framed around contract cheating, but the ideas still hold. We build on self-determination theory, this idea that people have fundamental needs of a sense of connection to other people, a sense of autonomy and a sense of competence. Those matter in assessment as well. We want assessment that builds connections between students, that helps them feel competent, gets them involved in making those judgments, and that makes them feel autonomous. I'm doing this because I choose to, perhaps some element of choice. And we look in the literature and find that students are more likely to want to do the work themselves and not take shortcuts if those sort of needs are supported. Final thing I want to plug is just this resource. This is from our Research Centre Cradle. It's a bunch of principles for good assessment design in a world of generative AI. You can have a look at that, the URL's there. It's under a Creative Commons attribution license, so you can rebrand it with your own institutional stuff as long as you acknowledge the source. You can grab bits, whatever else, and it builds on work from 5 of our books. So that's the spiel. That generative AI can do a lot of what we currently assess, that we probably can't and shouldn't ban it, and that assessment is to prepare students for their past and their future and not our past. Thank you so much. All right, questions, comments? We've got one just there.
Yeah, I found, thank you so much, the last couple of slides really fascinating about cognitive offloading and stuff. It kind of makes me, because my name is Abdullah, I'm one of the universities in Birmingham, but joining...
Your mic's not working super well. Could you just hold a little closer?
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's great, yeah.
Yeah, so we're joining King's next week, but kind of in working assessments, I was thinking this idea of cognitive offloading and then ensuring students are competent enough in the real world before they start relying on tools. I think that's kind of suggesting and hinting on ideas about what part of a course or program where that sort of opportunities can be designed into. So it's really a comment really giving ideas about not simply about assessments, but about different kinds of scaffolding that could suggest ideas for designing programs before you even think about assessments. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this really has to be tackled from a program level. Individual modules can't really do this well enough unless they just assess like a really small set of outcomes, and they can have the moments of understanding if students can meet the outcomes, as well as the understanding of if they can meet the outcome with the tool. In a sense, it's a little bit like, what's the unit of assessment, the unit of analysis here? Are we assessing the student or the student plus the tools? And we often fail to say which it is that we're assessing. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a really great presentation. Really, we had a discussion after your last prompt, like, you know, how's it impacting in our sector, and there was this tension, well, not tension, but it's kind of like a divide in a way. In first of all, recognising that this technology represents a tool, and I like that rendition you just gave, student plus the tool. When we spoke about, you know, Microsoft having Copilot and all these other kind of things, which are, wow, AIs don't like me.
It was the talk about feedback this morning.
Yeah, so we had this discussion about that, and I think there's consensus on the idea, kind of like, you know, these tools are really great when it comes to helping with communication. It says as long as you're talking about English, because I gave an example of what's happening in Saudi Arabia where it's banned, and because of the problems of translation spurring out offensive terms. But what I worry about is this whole idea that we tend to not discuss the fact that this generative AI, which we call it, works on the basis of predictive. It conforms language. It's taking very essence out of language. It's trying to find and predict the next most common phrase, which isn't what we're supposed to be currently assessing. We're supposed to be assessing creative intellectualism, you know, kind of like ideas, inspiration, innovation, which these tools can't do by design. They're not designed to be innovative. So where are we going wrong in this? I mean, I know people are using it to create art, but even that's not art. That's regurgitation and kind of like a pastiche of other people's artists' ideas. Where are we going wrong in kind of not recognizing that? Because no matter who I talk to, this whole idea about machines being sentient, which clearly isn't the case, seems to dominate, whether it's in education, whether it's in politics. When in reality, what's happening is that my background, I'm an anthropologist, so rather than recognising the beautiful diversity of the world, we're actually going in the opposite direction.
So early on with ChatGPT, I said to it, write me a dystopian science fiction story where society stagnates in the year 2022 because everyone relies on ChatGPT to write everything and no one creates any new ideas. And it did write me the story, and in the story, a bunch of clever, plucky sort of adventurers went and found a new cache of data to feed into ChatGPT, and that solved the problem. And I hope we don't end up there. I agree with you that we want divergent thinking, and we get convergent thinking with large language models. sometimes, you can give it a prompt that you hope gets it to go in some divergent way of thinking or something, and to what extent is that up to you and your creativity in prompting the machine? And is that you who's being creative, or is it the machine? But yeah, it's not an artificial intelligence in that sort of sense. It's a big statistical machine that can convert the statistics into words or whatever else. It comes down to sort of what's left for people as well, and maybe that's what we end up left with. Wouldn't that be a nice scenario where we as a society get to the point where we go, yeah, we can't, these machines can do all of the predictive stuff that's been done before, but it's up to us to do the innovation and the thinking. Yeah, sorry to just go philosophical with you on that. Yeah. Right. We've got one more back there.
Do you think we should be training students how to use ChatGPT? Because I was thinking, if they think it's kind of the resource that they were looking for, things they've been missing in their lives in terms of completing assessment, should we be asking them to, evaluatively judge an output from ChatGPT from their own work and, critique it in that sense and sort of say, you are a human, you do add value, promise, and this is how we can make it clear to them that this is not going to solve all of their problems and that there is a value in doing the work yourself.
Yeah, so there's some great work in the sort of critical digital literacies field and the sort of AI literacy. Lynette Pretorius has done some stuff on this. I think, yeah, we do want students to do that. Even if we don't care about generative AI, it's an opportunity to develop evaluative judgment and to really get that practice in evaluating these outputs that weren't produced by a real person, so you can say they're terrible. But I do think there's value in the skill set of being able to use these tools in the long term. I'd be wary of sort of being tied too closely to any current tools. It's like, what's a higher level capability, rather than I can do prompt engineering with the current ChatGPT and I can get around its deficiencies and guardrails and whatever, because that's pretty short term. But yeah, what's the longer term thing? And it probably sits in that critical digital literacies type space. Yeah, thanks. There was someone else. Was it? Yeah, I think it was you.
Interestingly, I was going to say something based on that, the fact that maybe we could use that as a teaching tool in terms of maybe helping students assess and give feedback on the output of ChatGPT. But I also just wondered how much, because you said something earlier about you can actually input work and get ChatGPT to come up with some outputs, but some answers and some feedback based on that. And I just wondered how good ChatGPT is at giving feedback on students' work.
It can do some stuff. I mean, a lot of the feedback that people provide isn't very uniform, so to say it's better or worse than a person, there's great variation. There are people out there trying large language models on student work to try and see if they can provide useful feedback. I think Dragan Gasovic and some other people have done work on that. It seems like it's something that's developing in the future, and I suspect that, Clippy 2.0, everyone remember Clippy, the Microsoft thing, the paperclip, it looks like you're trying to write a letter, that one. I think that's probably going to be sort of large language model fueled and very much a part of authentic practice. So not just an education thing to get feedback from some sort of generative AI, but something that's part of everyday professional practice. Our Uber driver 10 years from now, if it's still a person, will probably have all sorts of monitoring going on and feedback that's coming from these sorts of models about how courteous the Uber driver was to us. Yeah, I think we could have both some wonderful feedback things in the future and some dystopian feedback things. Yeah. I'm aware that we are a few minutes over time for this part. Marika, are you?
Yeah,
She's all right. We've got time for one more question then. All right, we've got one just over.
You asked us about our fields, but the question too is about the sector of education. to what extent that puts on us additional demands to create new content in the modules, because if the information which we provide is so basic that the ChatGPT has access to the data and can provide students with the answers, they will not demand the education university or simply ignore our lectures, so on and so forth. Is it a big concern or not that they will see the AI chat as a place to go to learn stuff and concepts which we are supposed to teach, and whether then we should shift the focus of what we do in the modules?
I think we're going to have to adapt to large language models with those three potential futures that I listed there. When I was in Canada, a scholar called Rahul Kumar said, well, there's a fourth one, which is that higher education does nothing and just gradually ceases to be relevant, perhaps ceases to exist. So I think there is a potential future there. And as far as students using these tools, Chegg has recently announced CheggMate, which is a large language model trained on over 1 billion outputs that Chegg has produced. That's 1 billion times students have come to Chegg legitimately, not cheating, and got what they wanted from a real person. And now there's that 1 billion things chucked into a large language model that's got everything that ChatGPT knows. And I think that we will see pushes by, that's Chegg. Surely a big ed tech like Pearson is looking at their large curated data set of work and going, how can we build something that will interact directly with the student? What does higher ed then offer in that context? I mean, prestige and accreditation might be the last things left, but do we even have that if people no longer trust what we have there? Relationships could be another thing. The cynic in me says getting to interact with a whole bunch of other futurely powerful middle-class people. That's some of what people go to higher ed for. But it will be a really interesting question that you ask. What is our value proposition in the future? Anyway, I'm going to hand over, I think. Oh, thanks.
You've got the clicker. I don't know where I can do it on here. Okay. Thank you very much, Phil. Wow, as that guy over there said. I think, yeah, incredible. So yeah, I've got the tough task of following on from Phil and just closing up with a few closing remarks. But I sort of thought, first of all, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a tough gig. And especially when I realised you did comedy, and then I heard some of your jokes, so it wasn't quite so bad. Okay, so just a few minutes from me. So I'm Marika Guy, I'm Head of Digital Assessment at UCL. And I just wanted to firstly just say a tiny bit about my team, because lots of them have come today and they're a really great bunch, and I just wanted to acknowledge. And also I think it's really important because my team and our team within digital education at UCL, we're trying to follow some of the things that Phil's really thinking about. And I just wanted to say that a couple of things that are really important to us. So one of those is around cross-team working. So we work across the institution with digital assessment, but with also assessment delivery. So that's really important that we work with different teams and also within a product team as well. Then there's the importance of cross-institutional working, so not just digital education, digital assessment, but with academics, with a whole other collection of different services in different spaces. I think that's really key. And I think it's been lovely today that there's lots of academics here, also lots of professional services. This is of real interest to people from all different parts of the institution, so I think that's really important. The next thing's around cross-sector working. So it's been wonderful to run the event today with King's, and they've been a fab team to work with. I've done virtually nothing. They put this event on and they just made me come on at the end. So I just think it's great. And I think the sector is doing some really exciting stuff in this space as well. We're working as, for example, in the area of AI, there's a GIST cross-institutional group. There's lots of other cross-institutional groups in all sorts of spaces. And I think some of the challenges that Phil's kind of alluded to today are really things that we need to be thinking about across our sector. And I think it's also really interesting to think about that in relation to Australia, which seems to be quite different in some areas as well. So I think some interesting stuff there. Within our team, we work across different platforms. So lots of these challenges, the digital part is almost kind of not the key thing here. And I think it's what different platforms bring different things to the party. We want to be future thinking and progressive. Something I really picked up from Phil today is that importance of thinking about the future and not about the here and now. And that's a real key message that we need to get across to some people who are a little bit more resistant in this space. Always learning, so lovely to come for a whole day and hear about all the different areas of work, so really key. And open practice. So Phil has done huge amounts of work out there, and if you follow him on Twitter, you'll know that his tweets are really valuable. But we want to be, within our team, we want to be open practice as well. So we're really keen to share our approaches and the things we do. So for example, on a blog, and just putting it out there, and we want us to have a discussion across the sector. Okay, so today, wow, it's been amazing. I just want to talk a little bit about the two different talks. So the first talk we had was around feedback. I think this was really interesting because this is an area that I have to admit myself personally, I don't get enough time to think about, and I think within our team we don't. The focus is often on assessment and rather than the actual feedback. Phil mentioned the Assessment in Higher Education conference that's on next week. I attended that last year, and again, like this guy, it blew my mind. There were some really interesting discussions going on there. People are being very progressive in the way they think about feedback, and I think we could definitely do with bringing some of that back. I think those practices are happening in pockets in our institutions, but actually not in enough places. So that was just thinking around how actually within professional services we need to be thinking about feedback more. It's not just something in the academic space. I really liked the conversation around communication. I think the students' observation that actually we're asking for them to be really creative and think outside the box, and then actually when we mark, we're using very rigorous approaches, quite kind of defining the space that we want students to be behaving in, and actually we're not allowing that creativity. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. Hear me, or do we need it for the recording? Okay. Oh, back on again. Okay, sorry about that. So one of the other things I really thought was interesting was the discussion around waste. So how much time people spend, but actually not achieving very much. So I think you mentioned something around if the assessment's 10% at the beginning and 60% later, then putting that real effort in where it's going to achieve something. So I think we can think about as institutions how we make much better use of our time. I know the academics are really overworked, but actually it's about thinking smart around how we do things like assessment and feedback. The sort of idea of focusing on what students do with that feedback, again, I think it's quite often doesn't feel like enough time is spent on that, and more effort could be put in, and we could really follow up with them, spend more time kind of having that dialogue. I thought the ideas of 3 different types of feedback. This was a new one to me. I really liked this approach, this idea of the kind of evaluation, coaching and appreciation, and actually how you need the right type of feedback. You might need all of those, but actually if you get the wrong type, it doesn't work for you. You might need that appreciation. You might need to feel supported, or you might need a coaching rather than some of the other areas. So really interesting ideas there. I loved when we talked about our own reactions to feedback. That made me think about how actually I can be quite defensive when people give me feedback. So sometimes understanding the student's point of view with that, and understanding maybe why they don't want to engage with it beyond our kind of education system that encourages grades rather than feedback. The idea about learning from the feedback literate educators. I thought that was a great one. I'm going to go and look up the 19 different ways that they can create really good feedback. So I think that's something that we can take forward. I know within our institution we tried to build some of those practices in, but having that list, and I think Phil was so kind of practical all the way through, really top tips to take away. I thought it was interesting, we talked about kind of how feedback gets tagged on the end. Well, actually, sometimes assessment design itself gets tagged on the end, and then feedback is this very poor cousin of assessment, and actually that's where the real value is. If we're really trying to get graduates that have great skills, then feedback is where we can make that big difference. Another one about who am I safe to get feedback from, and trying to understand that you don't always have to take feedback on board as well. I think there was a really interesting we started touching on it, a discussion around anonymous marking. I think this is something that we need to think about going forward, maybe in relation to areas like AI as well. I think across the UK, we tend to go down the anonymous marking approach for a number of different reasons. Maybe that's a conversation that needs to be resurrected. Really surprised to hear that that's not always the case in Australia. Be interested to discuss that a bit more with people. And the other one, and the last point here is just that I wish Phil was a walking reference list, and he just, every time he says something, I almost need it to come up on the side, and there's just so much to go away and look up afterwards. Okay, the next talk, this is more my area, I have to say. So I think most of this was just a real reassurance that we're doing the right things in the right space. I've been working on some of the institutional approach to AI, so I felt I was in a very secure place with a lot of this. As I mentioned, Phil talks quite a lot about he's interested in the long-term change rather than the short-term hacks. I think that's a real key message as we try to persuade people as we go down this journey, that actually there is no such thing as an AI-proof assessment, which I've been asked for many occasions. It's just not going to happen. It's actually something we're going to have to do in the long term, and it's going to take quite considerable effort and probably some resource as well. So the idea, this was reassuring, the idea of the evidence-based up front. I feel like within those working in this space have really struggled when people have just wanted us to know everything, and we haven't been able to do that, let alone with evidence to back it up. And actually, he talked about walking away from some practices, some places trying things and it not working. Felt quite reassuring that that's happening. Because sometimes I feel like we might make a decision that's wrong, and we just need to deal with that and actually decide that was something we decided in an attempt to deal with the now sort of thing. The taxonomy of options and their viability, I thought that was really great. The fact that we need to think for the future, and that a lot of the things we're trying to do just aren't going to work in the long term. Again, that's about making our case with academics and other areas. I really like the validity lens. I thought that was great, and definitely as we work through a lot of our assessment redesign, that's a really useful one to take when trying to think about what we could do for the future. I think quite often we're very focused on AI and the impact it has, but actually this just sits into part of a wider conversation around academic integrity that we've been having for quite some time. The scaffolding and reverse scaffolding as well, that was a really interesting idea, and I liked the analogy with flying the plane. I thought that was quite a helpful one about how we're going to use tools in the future. I think it's a conversation we're having within my institution around what sort of skill sets students need to retain around the future, and how we can keep them to make sure they retain those. Then finally, just some things on deciding what is good enough, and how if we use those tools, sometimes that we will, it's really helpful if we have an understanding already, then you can really know how to use those tools. And I think that whole piece around literacy for both staff and students is key there. And a little bit of a discussion at the end I thought was interesting around divergent thinking versus convergent thinking, and how we can retain creativity. So they're my reflections. I'm sure you've got your own. There's a whole load of notes that I've got that I need to work my way through. Hopefully you've had a lot of food for thought today. I think it's really, it's been a great day. I just wanted to finish with another thank you for Phil for coming along and talking to us today. I think all of you really appreciate the effort he's put in. 2 massive talks, and I love the way he facilitated them, and we all got involved as well. Again, thanks to the organising committee at King's, Sam, Sally, and the team as well. It's been a great team effort. This just came out of a tweet, by the way, the whole of this event. It was a tweet, and we jumped in, and we managed to pull it all together. I didn't do very much, but they pulled it together, and so it's really been quite great to see it happening in practice. And finally, just thanks to all of you for coming along. I think it's great to see so many people here from across different institutions. I know some people have come in from way outside London as well. So very nice to see you all. And thanks very much. We'll just have a final clap for Phil for his effort. Thanks.